Madrid 1834. The corridors of the royal palace are silent, dimly lit by candles that flicker against marble walls. A royal physician is summoned in the dead of night. The king, Ferdinand VII, has just drawn his final breath. Yet the queen regent, Maria Cristina, demands one final act, not a ritual of farewell, but a preservation. She orders that a part of the late king's body must be embalmed and hidden forever. It is not his heart or his brain, but something far stranger, an organ that had haunted the monarchy for decades. The physician stands frozen. Beneath the silk shroud lies a source of countless whispers. Ferdinand's grotesquely deformed anatomy, the secret that reshaped a nation from within. Even lifeless, the king's presence is suffocating. The queen's order carries a meaning beyond medicine. It is the sealing of an era, the burial of a curse. This is not merely the story of a man's illness. It is the story of a kingdom ruled by shame, obsession, and the tyranny of one man's body. A monarchy that tried to mask its decay with gold and prayer, only to reveal that power itself can rot from the inside. And it all began in the royal bedchamber, where politics, religion, and desire fused into something far darker than sin. To understand Ferdinand's reign, one must begin not with his crown, but with his body. From his youth, whispers haunted the Spanish court, rumors of a grotesque deformity, a cruel joke of nature that turned royal duty into agony. It was a secret too scandalous to write in records, yet too powerful to hide. When Ferdinand first married Maria Antonia of Naples, the union was meant to seal Catholic alliances and strengthen Spain's fading influence. But inside the palace, it became a nightmare. The young queen, barely 20, endured miscarriage after miscarriage, each one more horrific than the last. Doctors could not explain her suffering. Courtiers whispered of unnatural wounds, and Ferdinand, tormented by his own body, turned his rage upon her. He accused her of betrayal, of deliberately defying God's command to bear him an heir. Her health withered, and opium dulled her pain until she drifted like a ghost through the corridors. When she died in 1807, the court blamed fever, but the servants spoke differently. They said she died of despair. Days later, the palace apothecary who had prepared her medicines was found dead, and a mysterious letter vanished forever into the royal archives. It was said to contain the truth that could destroy the throne. Ferdinand's second marriage to Maria Isabel of Portugal was no less tragic. The wedding was a public spectacle, yet what followed in private was terror. The queen's screams echoed through the halls. Physicians called it hysteria, but it was trauma. She became pale, trembling, afraid of her own husband. Within 2 years, she too was dead, drained by fear and exhaustion. Ferdinand ordered multiple autopsies, seeking proof that someone had poisoned her. But what he really hunted was the reflection of his own guilt. By the time he married Maria Josepha of Saxony, the royal bedroom had turned into a laboratory. Physicians devised elaborate instruments to assist intimacy cushions, pulleys, even surgical devices. Everything was measured, timed, recorded. The marriage became a ritual of humiliation. Maria Josepha, calm and methodical, treated her encounters with Ferdinand as procedures to endure. But when she conceived in 1829, it seemed a miracle. The palace dared to hope. Yet 7 months later, she bled, delivered a premature child who lived only for hours, and followed her into death 3 weeks later. The king refused to let go. He ordered the corpses embalmed, sealed the chamber, and forbade burial. For days, the air filled with rot and incense, a grotesque mixture of devotion and denial. Ferdinand spoke to their death masks at night, as if conversing with the ghosts of his failures. In these marriages, the royal bed became a political institution. Doctors, priests, and artisans conspired to preserve the illusion of fertility. Spain itself was ruled not by law, but by the anatomy of one man. Every ritual of faith, every invention of science, served a single obsession: the production of an heir. Ferdinand's body had become the state. His deformity was not just private misfortune, it was public policy. The empire's survival depended on the impossible, and the impossible was killing everyone around him. By the end of the 1820s, Ferdinand's secret had become the axis of his kingdom. The need to hide his condition had turned into a need to control everything. When shame becomes law, fear becomes routine. His fourth marriage marked the final stage of this transformation. Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies arrived at the Spanish court young, graceful, and visibly pregnant. The child's timing made paternity impossible, yet Ferdinand accepted it as divine mercy. The illusion of fertility was too precious to question. The baby girl Isabella was presented to Spain as a miracle, the long-awaited heir to the throne. And with her birth, Ferdinand's final delusion took shape. If truth threatened the crown, then truth must be destroyed. What followed was not a household, it was a fortress of surveillance. Ferdinand ordered holes drilled between the walls of his chambers and the queen's. Through them, he watched her sleep, pray, and nurse the child. He memorized her gestures, studied her expressions, searching for signs of betrayal. Servants learned to move silently, for even a misplaced glance could mean exile. Meals turned into rituals of terror. Each dish was tasted by servants who had to wait 30 minutes before the king dared to eat. Any twitch, any cough, any bead of sweat could be interpreted as proof of poisoning. Many fainted from fear. Some fled and never returned. Ferdinand took their panic as confirmation that conspiracies were everywhere. Maria Cristina's letters to her family were intercepted, copied, and read aloud to the king. Her words, harmless and tender, were twisted into evidence of treason. In her diary, hidden behind a false wall, she wrote, "I live as though under glass. They watch me even when I sleep." Ferdinand's paranoia spread through the court like infection. Ministers were tested with traps disguised as casual questions. He would contradict himself in meetings, waiting to see who dared correct him. Anyone who did was marked a traitor. The palace became a theater of obedience where every smile was rehearsed, every silence measured. Spain paid the price for its king's fear. The treasury drained not from war, but from security guards, hidden corridors, secret passages, elaborate alarm systems. The country starved while the palace multiplied its locks. And yet, the more Ferdinand tried to control, the less control he had. He was fighting a war against laughter. A single whisper about his body, a smirk from a servant, a rumor in the marketplace, these became acts of rebellion. And so the king, consumed by his need to appear whole, ruled through punishment. People disappeared without record. Families wept in silence. By then, the man who once dreamed of legacy had become its executioner. His shame had transformed into architecture, his paranoia into policy. The Spanish court no longer served the state, it served the king's insecurity. What had begun as a secret between husband and wife had expanded into a nation built on fear. Ferdinand's deformity was no longer hidden, it had taken the shape of Spain itself. Outside the palace walls, the world was shifting faster than Ferdinand could comprehend. Empires were rising and collapsing, revolutions spreading through the Americas, and Spain's colonies, once its pride, were slipping away one by one. Yet the king's attention never left the confines of his private chambers. While soldiers starved on distant frontiers and the treasury emptied, Ferdinand remained obsessed with one idea: legitimacy. His kingdom's survival, he believed, rested on a single question: was his daughter truly his blood? That obsession consumed not only his mind, but the machinery of government itself. Agents were dispatched across Europe to investigate Maria Cristina's past. They gathered portraits, letters, and rumors from Naples to Vienna, comparing facial features and family resemblances. Court physicians and genealogists were ordered to study Isabella's eyes, her jawline, the curve of her chin. Their reports, written in vague and trembling language, said nothing definite because truth was deadly. Inside the palace, Ferdinand's world grew smaller and darker. His chambers became a shrine of failure, walls lined with medical sketches, clamps, and relics of faith. The faces of his dead wives stared from their gilded frames, frozen witnesses to a reign built on suffering. The king wandered among them like a relic himself, half alive, half embalmed in superstition. The outside world saw what the court refused to admit. Foreign ambassadors wrote home in alarm, describing a monarch lost in delusion. Diplomatic ties with Spain weakened. Treaties stalled. Some nations quietly began funding independence movements within Spanish territories, reasoning that a divided Spain was safer than one ruled by madness. The king's paranoia turned inward. Even Maria Cristina's touch became suspect. He demanded that doctors inspect her hands before she could approach him, fearing she might hide poison under her nails. When she kissed him goodnight, he recoiled, certain her lips carried death. His sleepless nights were filled with hallucinations, visions of betrayal, voices whispering treason in the dark. Ferdinand's mind unraveled. and so did the state. Ministers avoided meetings, pretending to be ill rather than endure his rants. Royal decrees contradicted one another. Governance had collapsed into chaos. Spain had no direction, only a ruler drowning in his own terror. And yet, in his madness, Ferdinand returned again and again to the same obsession, his daughter, Isabella. He both adored and despised her. She was the living proof of his supposed redemption, but also the mirror of his humiliation. He would spend hours comparing her portraits to his own, searching for resemblance that did not exist. When silence fell upon the courtiers, he took it as conspiracy. The truth, unspoken yet undeniable, was that Ferdinand had become a prisoner of the lie he created. To protect his image, he destroyed the very kingdom that image was meant to rule. Spain was bleeding economically, politically, spiritually, and still the king demanded loyalty to an illusion. When Ferdinand finally collapsed in 1833, the physicians listed gout as the cause of death. But the real disease had eaten through him long before: shame, paranoia, and despair. When his body was examined, the legend proved true. His anatomy was indeed deformed beyond nature. Scars and old wounds revealed a lifetime of self-mutilation, a man who had tried to carve away his own curse. That organ, preserved in wax and glass, was sent to the Vatican for safekeeping, hidden in silence. There, in the vaults of history, it remains a symbol of a monarchy destroyed by its own secret. Spain emerged from his reign fractured, starving, and leaderless. The empire that once ruled oceans was now an echo of its former self. Ferdinand left behind a daughter to inherit his throne and a kingdom built on fear. His story became a whisper across Europe, the king who ruled through his body and whose body ruled him in return. Ferdinand's reign ended not with triumph, but with silence. His palace, once the heart of an empire, had become a mausoleum filled with ghosts. The marble floors that had echoed with prayers for an heir now held only the echoes of his paranoia. Spain, a nation that had once commanded the seas, stood hollow and humiliated, a mirror of its monarch's decay. This was never just a story about one man's affliction. It was the anatomy of power itself, when authority grows out of fear instead of wisdom. Ferdinand's body dictated his politics, his shame dictated his laws, and his obsession with control over wives, servants, and truth transformed a royal household into a state of perpetual imprisonment. Every attempt to hide weakness only bred more weakness. Every lie told to protect the throne eroded its foundation. Ministers became actors, courtiers became spies, and the king became both jailer and captive of his own delusion. In the end, Ferdinand's greatest conquest was not of territory, but of himself, and even that victory was hollow. His preserved organ, locked away in the Vatican, is more than a medical curiosity. It is a relic of a forgotten truth, that nations can perish from private wounds. A kingdom built on denial will eventually collapse under the weight of its own silence. Ferdinand's Spain teaches a lesson as old as power itself, that when a ruler's body becomes a law, the law becomes sick. When personal shame dictates policy, even the strongest empire begins to rot. And when the mask of divinity cracks, what remains is only the face of a frightened man. So when historians speak of kings and empires, they often ask how they rose. But in this story, the more urgent question is how one man's body managed to drag a whole kingdom down with it. The throne of Spain did not fall because its enemies were strong. It fell because its master was afraid to be seen as human. And history, in its cruelest honesty, never forgets the kings who built their power on denial. Because sometimes, the most terrible tyrannies are born not in the battlefield or the council chamber, but in the quiet, haunted chambers of the human mind.